After a wet summer, the level of Lake Okeechobee stands at just a bit over 17 feet. The Army Corps of Engineers doing daily inspections of the dike. How risky is the situation? Joining me now to talk about the dike around Lake O is Dr. Les Bromwell, a civil engineer who's worked on projects to strengthen the dike. Sir, thank you for coming in. We'll talk a bit about your work that you did in 2006 that led to some of the restoration work being done on the dike right now. But generally, the Corps likes to keep the lake levels between 12.5 14.5 feet or so, because too much water threatens the integrity of this decades-old dike, this earthen dike that's being built. As we sit here today, your concerns?
Well, my concerns are exactly what happened this year. Potentially very large hurricanes, class 4, class 5, one following the other, and there's only so much that the lake can take as far as inflow of water. An inch of rain up in the Kissimmee River Valley adds up to 6 inches of rain, and when it gets to the lake, and the lake cannot discharge it as fast as it comes in.
When we want to move forward in the conversation, but to do that, I want to move back a bit. In 2006, you led a team really looking at the dike. Talk about the work you did and what it led to.
Okay, in 2006, I was asked by the South Florida Water Management District to put together a expert technical panel to review all of the records involved with the dike. This was shortly after Katrina had devastated New Orleans, and so we took that assignment on. There was a long history of records involving the dike, from its original construction through maintenance.
In the Depression era.
Yeah. In the Depression era, the way it was constructed, and then basically what had happened once in the 1970s, the lake started holding more and more water.
What was your fundamental conclusion?
Our conclusion was that the dike basically was not safe, that it had, in any given year, there was basically a 1 in 6 chance that that dike could fail.
And that work led to restoration, multi-billion-dollar restoration work that goes on now to take this old earthen dike and replace it, hopefully someday, they say by 2025 in total, with a concrete dike around it. But your work helped lead to that effort, correct?
Yes, it did. It really got a lot of widespread attention, largely because Governor Jeb Bush read the report and accepted it.
And yet, 11 years later, that work still is at least 8 years until completion. How big is the risk today, even with big chunks of that work having already been done? You said it was a 1 in 6 chance then. Has it demonstrably improved if that lake gets too high?
Oh yes, that's the good news. The money that the Corps of Engineers spent went right to the critical areas, which is largely in the southeast section of the dike between Port Mayaca and, say, Belle Glade. Was the most vulnerable, and they have reinforced the dike in that area by putting in this cement concrete cutoff wall.
It's almost like filling a cavity, going into the old earthen dike and putting this concrete retainer in there.
Right, it actually is. It cuts off the seepage down to a depth, and then they also put a seepage collection system for what did come through at the toe.
Having said all that and the improvements, and it's wonderful news to hear, are we playing with borrowed time if we don't get this thing completed? And it seems the timetable moves back and back every year. And of course, that's a funding issue out of Washington. Your concerns, though, going forward?
My concerns going forth are that we do need to accelerate the completion of the repairs. The risk has been greatly reduced in the most vulnerable area, but still, there's at least 22 miles more of the soil cement bentonite, we call it slurry wall, to put in to cut off that seepage between basically Lake Harbor and Clewiston.
So the good news is a lot stronger than it was, but a lot left to be done. That if we had the money and time, you'd love to see them expedite it
as soon as possible.
Post-haste.
Absolutely.
There's been a lot of talk. The Florida legislature approved a reservoir south of Lake Okeechobee. Your take on that, is that of value in your mind to take excess lake water? I know you've been a critic of that, if I understood correctly.
That's correct. I think that by the time all is said and done, the modeling's complete, the alternatives are really evaluated. We need that reservoir south of the lake, but I don't think it's the best way to spend the money right now, frankly.
What's the best way to spend the money right now?
Well, if you really want to take water that has to flow out to the estuaries now, St. Lucie and out the Caloosahatchee, I only see one solution, and that's deep injection wells around the lake. that puts it in 3,000 feet underground into
below our drinking water supply.
1,500 feet below any potential drinking water supply. And there are already 180 of them in use now. Some have been there for as long as 80 years. There's never been a reported incident or a problem. And they're basically discharging wastewater. This is considered Class 3 water, and it's not a pollutant in that regard.
We did a story on this a few weeks ago. Again, injection wells below our water supply, politically and monetarily. Do you see it flying in Tallahassee?
Well, I hope so.
I'm asking you to be a soothsayer.
I certainly can't make that prediction,
sure.
But it is the most reasonable, economical way to do it, and really the only way to completely solve the issue that you don't want this excess water going out to the estuaries.
And because of the pollution issues we saw with the algae crisis last year, at least a contributing cause. Some think it was the sole cause, others a contributing cause. And you're talking about sending it east and west, which was the big issue last year. My colleague Alex Hagan's also done a lot of work on the glades and has said you've also talked about an emergency spillway. You feel there's a need for that as well, and that you've talked about that.
Well, any dam like that that's built has to have a spillway to discharge water. It can't just keep collecting water. And it also needs an emergency spillway to handle these unusual and rare events when even the service spillway can't handle it. I mean, that's just a ABC for designing dams. Unfortunately, that wasn't even considered when it was built back in the Depression. It was just built out of sediments dug up in the lake. And the outlets are the 4 canals. And then they dug 2 more, the St. Lucie and the Caloosahatchee canals. And they still can't discharge water that is needed to be discharged during these very high rainfall events. But you also can't build as a practical matter, you can't build an emergency spillway now for Lake Okeechobee.
Doctor, final thoughts. As I said to you before we went on, you're the expert here. If there's one message you want to leave our viewers with and policymakers with about Lake Okeechobee, the dike, and of course it's the heart of our water system, what is that message?
That message is we have to find ways to get more money to, this plan has been there for 18 years now, and we're making progress, but it's very slow. It's just a lack of funding. I know there's a lot of competition for federal and state money these days, but this is urgent. We need to accelerate the pace. We need to make it safer for the future and for the future water supply needs of our state. We're wasting too much water.
And do you think there will come the day where we will see that sheet flow of water restored to the south? There are a lot of political issues involved with moving water south. It's easy to say send the water south. Do you ultimately see the day where we can restore the Everglades by doing just that with water from the lake?
I don't think we'll ever move all that water south, frankly. It's just the land has been taken for too many other purposes. There are 7+ million people living down there now. The Everglades have shrunk. We still have that precious Everglades National Park, but beyond that, most of the original Everglades are now either impoundments or agricultural areas or developments.
The best we can do for restoration is what, in your opinion?
For restoration, I think we get back on the program. If we can get the money to do it, we build the reservoirs that are in the plan, and we look seriously at these injection wells for solving the discharge problem in the estuaries.
Doctor, nobody more than you has studied the dike and some of the solutions that we need. Thank you for adding your voice to the debate. We appreciate you being our guest here on To The Point.
Thanks for the invite. I appreciate it.
Look forward to having you back, and we'll be back in a moment.